Hello there, this is Mrs. Gabriel, and I'm going to present part 3 of chapter 9, water resources. We're going to focus on dams and other ways that we alter our water resources. So we're going to start with just a review of our aquifer depletion as one of our water problems in the U.S. Do you remember the name of that major aquifer? That's correct. It's the Ogallala Aquifer. Now, if you look at this map and you see what's in dark brown versus light brown, the dark brown is our critical area. That's where we're depleting our groundwater at a much higher rate than we can possibly replenish. So we have to think of, with these problems, what we can do to manage our water more carefully. And this is just a review chart. You've seen this before to remind you of some very, very important numbers. So let's start with what's not on the chart, and that is the 70% magic number. 70% of Earth is water. But when it all boils down to how much of that water we can use, we can actually only use about 0.5% of it. By use, I mean for showers and drinking water. So you really need to get to know this chart. 70% of the Earth is water. Over 97% of that is seawater, which we can't drink. That will dehydrate us. Of that 100% of the 70%, only 2.5% is freshwater. But out of the 2.5% that's freshwater, a ton of that is frozen in ice caps and glaciers. So that's why we only have about 0.5% that we can use. We have to be careful in how we use our water. So there is enough, as this first bullet shows. There is enough water, but it's not evenly distributed, and we don't manage the runoff of our water carefully enough to preserve it or conserve it. Some of the major problems that have to do with why we have freshwater problems are climate change. Drinking water is a problem that we have to limit the contaminations of, population growth, and being friendly with each other in sharing our water, not just among countries, but also from state to state. You do need to understand that climate change is impacting the amount of water available for us, the amount of fresh water available to us, and the amount of fresh water that is not contaminated. So some of the issues are with climate change. If you're ever asked, how does climate change impact water and water availability for human use? Well, you could say that climate change can actually reduce the amount of snowfall. If we have less snowfall, we have less runoff going into our streams. So we have less stream water. That's our surface water that we still use for drinking in many places. Also, as a result of climate change, the sea level could rise. If we have more sea water, that's more salt water, that's more pressure, and more of a potential saltwater intrusion for all the groundwater supplies along coastlines. Other drinking water problems that seriously need to be considered is that developing countries do not have safe drinking water, or they don't have access to water and they have to travel very far just to get it. And when they do, it's not much and it's contaminated to the point where it can make them very sick and kill them. Many, many thousands of people a year die from drinking water contamination. Also, our population is growing worldwide and especially growing in developing countries. And this increased population means that they need more safe, fresh water. We also use, as you know from the last slideshow, we use a ton of our water for agriculture. We need to think about how we're using water for agriculture and practice more sustainable agricultural methods. Other things, this is just an example on the map. We have an example of a river here. This is the Rhine River. And the Rhine River Basin, you're probably most familiar in discussing the Rhine in Germany. But it's not just in Germany. Just follow the lines for the Rhine. And the Rhine River runs what looks like north, but this is actually downstream or downwater or downriver into the North Sea. As it runs from one country into the next, other countries are contaminating the Rhine River. By that contamination, other people way, way downriver have to clean up that water before they can even use it for drinking. And it's not even their fault that it's contaminated. Other examples of countries that just irritate each other because of their shared water are around the Aral Sea, and we'll look at that on the next slide. And that's because they have diverted the water for irrigation, and it's caused the sea to, we'll see in a couple slides, the sea to become salty. We also have water wars just because we're building dams, and we'll go more into that. And by building dams, whoever's downstream of what was once a big flowing river is now impacted by less water downstream. Okay, so when we think about what we can do to conserve our water, we also need to think about not just conservation, but management of the water that we do have. And here are some of the things that we're going to go over in the rest of the pictures that you look at. Dams and reservoirs. We have to manage our water using these things. Water diversion projects. What is water diversion? Desalinization. What do we mean desalinization? That's our goal. Make sure you know that. We want high quality water, and we want to be able to share it with all humans. So the first picture you're looking at here is aqueducts. And aqueducts are used to carry water from one location to another. So if you don't live along a lake or live along a river, traditionally we've used these even in Roman times. We find our freshwater source and we construct bridges or roadways for that water to be carried from one location to the next. The picture to the left shows a much smaller aqueduct, and the picture to the right shows a much larger aqueduct. And the one to the left is an example of a section of the Colorado River aqueduct. So it goes from the Colorado River to Los Angeles, and it passes right through the Mojave Desert. Yes, this really does exist. Sometimes our aqueducts are also used for transportation. So not only do they transport the water, but they also use it to carry cargo, or for, in that case, just ships. This is just another example of an aqueduct. So it looks like a road, and it just looks like, oh, isn't that a nice little river? But it's been constructed in order to bring fresh water from one location to another. And these have been used for a very, very long time. You also need to know that we alter our water and our water availability from levees, dikes, and dams. So what you're looking at here is a picture of a levee, and they're built to prevent rivers from flowing over their banks into the floodplain. The one that you're looking at right here is a picture from 2008, and it's close to St. Louis, Missouri, and the levee collapsed. That's what you see. And when it collapsed, the water from the ocean just came on in, and floodwaters spread all over the place. So when the levee breaks. Oh, and you also need to know, let me go back, you need to know what a dike is. It's very similar to a levee, so it's kind of like a wall that holds back the water from pouring in from a larger body of water. And dikes are built to prevent ocean waters from flooding into adjacent land. So what you're looking at here is California. So California receives a lot of its water from diverting water from other locations. If you look at the picture and you see what's in blue, you'll see that we have lakes that are labeled in blue, as well as aqueducts, which are the transportation lines for the water to go from one large water location, such as a river or a lake, to go to a place that's more highly populated. And these are really controversial, because moving water from one location to another and diverting it the way that you see fit impacts the other people that lived along that waterway and used it naturally before it was diverted. And this creates something that we call water wars. And it's really expensive, by the way, to divert water. Okay, back to the Aral Sea. If you could look for my little red dot on the map, this just shows you globally where the Aral Sea is. The Saudi Arabia, look for Italy, so you get your bearings right here. So the Aral Sea is a great case study of a problem with water diversion. The Aral Sea at one point was the world's 4th largest freshwater lake. So let's go back and take a look at what this picture is trying to show us. So this is a consequence of water diversion. Diverting river water can have devastating impacts downstream, as I told you before in the other pictures. The Aral Sea is bordering a couple of different countries, and as the world's 4th largest lake, it was a great resource for many, many people for fresh water. And since the 2 rivers that fed the lake were diverted, the rivers that went into the lake were actually diverted to go to bigger cities. The surface area declined by 60%. You can tell by looking in the pictures. Look at how much less surface area there is. And the lake has become split into 2 parts now, and now it's the North and South Aral Sea. Here's another picture again, just showing you that change in the surface area of the lake. And now you see our two C's. And here it is with some nice pretty labels for you to understand and see how much surface area we lost because people were getting greedy by diverting the water and abusing the amount of water they used. So if I were to ask you a question on an FRQ, let's say, about the environmental impacts or the negative environmental consequences of diverting water from the Aral Sea, if you look at the bullets, we can see what some of these are. So environmentally, we're looking at biodiversity problems. Environmentally, we're looking at salinity has increased in the sea. Okay, the opening to this chapter, we talked about the Upper Klamath Lake. This is a picture of what it looked like before we diverted water from it. This is a picture of what it looked like as an impact of the water diversion. So it dried up. Okay, so we know about some of the issues with water diversion. What are the other things that we do to alter our water resources? We build dams and we make reservoirs. So go ahead and read this to yourselves, but we build them because we need them. We need them for electricity, we need them to reduce flooding downstream somewhere, and we need them for agriculture, irrigation, and for supplying drinking water to us. We disrupt these systems that were once natural. In the United States, we have well over 80,000 hydroelectric dams. You guys are most familiar with a really common one around here, and that's the Conowingo Dam. It's on the Susquehanna River, and that is our hydroelectric dam. Many of these dams are not really safe to use anymore, and they've been recommended to be decommissioned. So some of the benefits of a dam is, as I said before, to generate electricity. The water behind the dam can be used as a reservoir, and we can use that for recreational activities like boating, fishing, and swimming, and this is common behind dams. And this also regulates how much water is flowing downstream, especially like in the springs when the snow melts everywhere. But there are definitely disadvantages to ecosystems. The fish can't swim all the way upstream. We don't have as much sediment that carries the nutrients that we do want where it belongs, so we have a reduction in our sediment load. So we have benefits and we have disadvantages. So the pictures that you're looking at here are the Three Gorges Dam, and I believe that's the Hoover Dam on the right. They're barriers. They run across rivers, and we can have multiple dams on one river, and we typically do. And then just remember that right behind it is where our reservoir is. So the reservoir will be behind the dam. That's what's holding the water. And we'll learn later about how, what a dam looks like in detail for hydroelectric power use really soon. This is a picture of the Glen Canyon Dam, also along the Colorado River. I actually visited here. It was really cool, very, very tight security. And I took a group of kids from the SMA, and if you look at the road that goes in the front of the dam, we were on the side of the dam where the water was released, and we took a boat tour. So that was kind of crazy, looking at this huge, giant wall behind us that was holding all that water in the reservoir behind us. And the ecosystem was incredibly different behind the dam versus the front of the dam in Glen Canyon, bigger part of the Grand Canyon. This is what a dam looks like when they first start the construction. So this is a massive undertaking, and as you can see, there's a lot of habitat destruction that goes on to begin and to continue with this process. Again, the Three Gorges Dam, this is in China, very, very famous, very, very new, very, very controversial. So what disrupts the integrity of the river system? We have flooding that happens above the dam. That's in the reservoir area. We have too much sediment that builds up behind the dam. And we don't get that floodplain where lots of floodwaters build up and then they recede. And lots of floodwaters build up and then they recede, just like from rainfall and such. Below the dam, that was the part where I took my little boat tour, think of that, We don't have our natural river flow patterns anymore, so now it's pretty much going in the one direction dictated by the dam release. We don't get all that vegetation. We don't get the diversity, nor do we get the richness that's important for the rest of the ecosystem. And we don't get that floodplain. And a floodplain is really important because it brings the nutrients to more than just the banks. Okay, now we're looking at a cut out view of sandbars. Sandbars are part of that deposition of material, okay? So if you just look at the picture really carefully, sorry, I should have made it larger. They're showing in the picture, they're showing you where these sandbars are, and sandbars are just pieces of sediment that were carried downriver and then dropped off. These are really important because they are habitats for species when they're just at their larva stage that just live in there. They might be nests for where fish lay their eggs. Sandbars are incredibly important, and they're incredibly important for also providing diversity in habitat. Now, because we have learned how much it has killed the biodiversity by building dams downstream, now we regulate the flow, and we actually purposely flood the canyons where dams are in order to bring back that sediment deposit and the nutrient deposit that comes along with that. And we have noticed from doing a couple of these planned floods that the ecosystem does tend to build a little better than it was before we started doing that flooding. So if you look at the second picture that just showed up here, this is showing you how bad it looks after the dam construction. And this is why we do that planned flooding now. And C shows you floods. So the waters are now going past the banks. This is important because the waters also carry sediment and nutrients in them. And now we're restored back to our sandbars, and we've dropped off some nutrients on those beyond the banks. And that's important for building species richness, getting more of that biotic material in there as well. Okay, what we're looking at here is a fish ladder, and they're what we thought was going to be our way of fixing our problem with the salmon population. So the opener to this book in the first presentation, I talked to you about the Klamath River and how salmon was no longer able to go upstream, and if they couldn't go upstream to spawn, then we don't have any more salmon. So they started building these fish ladders. Oops, let me go back. They started building fish ladders along all these dams, and the fish ladders were supposed to encourage the movement of the salmon and other fish that have to migrate all the way upstream for their yearly spawning. So we built fish ladders on the Conowingo as well, so you're familiar with the Susquehanna River and the Conowingo. To the right is what our fish ladder looks like, and this is to help with the migration of the Great American Shad, which is the name of a fish. But this is our fish that we needed to save in the Susquehanna. If you take a look at the map to the left, look where the Susquehanna River is. I'm going to help you a little. All the way down at the bottom is the Chesapeake Bay, and then if you look carefully, right on that Maryland line is the Conowingo Dam. That's the one that you're most familiar with. That is our hydroelectric dam. Notice that we have 3 other dams that are upriver from the Conowingo. So all the impacts of dams environmentally are occurring multiple times along the Susquehanna River. So the Conowingo is the last of them before it releases into the Susquehanna and then directly into the bay. If you want to, you can go on to YouTube and you can look up a video on the Conowingo fish lift, and you can actually see it fully animated on how it works. Okay, now we're going to look at what's actually going on inside a dam. We will do this another time, but this is just a quick little introduction. So find the reservoir. The reservoir is behind the dam. And notice that there's little boats, and there's somebody, I think, water skiing on that boat. So we use the reservoir behind the dam. The benefits are that we can use it for recreation. It can also produce a cheaper, cleaner form of electric power. It can also, in the reservoir, provide water for us to drink, as the Loch Raven Reservoir does for much of Baltimore County and Harford County. We also can use the reservoir to draw on, if you look all the way to the left, for agriculture. and we don't get as much flooding downstream. But if you look at all the little notes to the right, that tells us all the impacts. So we get much more large losses of water through evaporation. And we've already talked about the deprivation of nutrients. We can, the dam can fail, and there can be horrible flooding downstream that nobody was prepared for. And the migration of the spawning fish is disrupted. Now, if you look at the bottom picture, that shows you the turbine, look right in the middle of the picture, and that actually shows you how the water flows from the reservoir through the dam, where it turns the turbine, and therefore provides power. And we'll learn that in more detail, and that's how we use it for electric power. And then the water is just released downstream. That's how a dam works. You can pause this and read it again on your own if you need to. Okay, so the Three Gorges Dam is the really big one that I told you about. Let me just jump ahead. And that's in China on the Yangtze. So it goes into the Yellow Sea. This is the newest and the world's largest dam right now. So just kind of follow it along, and then I'm going to go back to that last slide so you have a better idea of the Three Gorges Dam. It's a huge, huge debate, and its reservoir, as a dam, its reservoir is really problematic. So no longer will it be 2 kilometers long. It actually officially is now. It's going to give enough electricity, provide enough electricity, so that's 18 large coal-burning or nuclear power plants that do not need to be constructed. It facilitates ship travel, so it has these locks that it can use to help with ships going through. But over 1 million people had to move as a result of the dam construction. That's a change in community and society. And it's built over a fault line, so it already has small little cracks and is a potential earthquake disaster. But hydroelectric power instead of 18 coal-burning and nuclear power plants. To remove the dam is a whole other story, and the Three Gorges is not going to be removed anytime soon. But there is dam removal, and there's 500 of them in our country alone. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has approved for removal. It costs a lot of money to remove them also. Okay, so the Colorado River Basin is what I'm going to show you a picture of in a minute. It has many dams and withdrawals, and remember, we divert water from the Colorado, and this is creating wars among communities that are downstream versus upstream. But it's providing a ton of electricity that's hydroelectric power. So this is just one picture leaving Lake Powell. And this is another map showing you, if you look at everything in green, all the dams along the Colorado River. So notice how many different communities are impacted by the water upstream. So the first dam affects everything downstream. The second dam affects everything downstream. So all the people that used to live along this river have been negatively and positively impacted because of the construction of all these dams. So there's pros and cons. Now this system lies in an almost all desert area, and it has a little rain shadow effect as well. Remember the rain shadow effect. We're not getting rain over the mountains once the clouds drop, and that's from the California mountain ranges. It provides, all this water provides water and electricity for more than 25 million people. And as you notice, this is 7 states that we're covering. 7 different states sharing this water. The river's water is used to produce about 15% of the nation's crops and livestock. That's our crops, our livestock, what we eat. It also supports a multi-billion-dollar recreational industry because everybody goes there for whitewater rafting, for boating, for fishing, for camping, for hiking. That's a lot of money economically. The river supplies water to some of the nation's driest and hottest cities that you're most familiar with. So you take away this river, and Las Vegas, Nevada is going to be mostly uninhabited. It'll be desert. San Diego, Los Angeles, California, they can't support their present populations without this water getting diverted to them. In California's Imperial Valley, which grows a major portion of all the nation's vegetables, would consist almost all of cactus and just plants that are not edible. So the water available from Colorado is likely to decrease even more because of climate change caused by global warming. And according to experts, they're projecting that as the climate continues to warm, mountain snows that feed the river are going to melt faster, and they're going to melt earlier, and they're going to evaporate in greater amounts instead of running downriver. And in some of the Southwest region's largest reservoirs, they're just going to empty. They're going to empty out, and the region could experience an economic and ecological catastrophe with political battles, legal battles over who's going to get how much of the region's very, very diminished water supply. And agricultural production could drop sharply, and then many people in the region's desert cities like Phoenix, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, they're going to have to migrate to other areas. So these are negative impacts. And we're going to end up, as a result of that, having to withdraw more of our groundwater, which is not a good solution, because then we're going to drop our water tables. And then we have more problems, even more problems with our groundwater and that ever shrinking Ogallala aquifer. So what do we do about it? What would you do about it? How would you vote? Do the advantages of large dams outweigh their disadvantages? You have an A and a B response. Do the advantages outweigh their disadvantages? Which would you pick if I did this on a clipboard? And there's no yes or no. There's no really right answer for this. It's just, well, where do you stand? So some researchers argue that the 7 states using this Colorado River system should actually enact and enforce really strict water conservation measures. And it's recommended that they increase the price that people pay for water from the river. They also suggest that some measures be put into place to slow the population growth in those areas, and that urban development stops and agriculture stops or gets moved, and we use agriculture shifts, and we don't use crops that require so much water. We use crops that don't need as much. And people living in or moving to areas served by that river have to realize that they're actually living in a desert, and they must adapt to the natural desert environment. What do you think of those strategies? Okay, so we manage our water and we impact our water supply by building dams and reservoirs. Other things that we do, desalinization and desalting seawater. We also seed clouds, and we remove salt. So distillation and reverse osmosis are the methods. Distillation, you need to understand the differences here. It's just heating the salt water, and then the water itself is going to evaporate and it leaves the salt behind. We also can use reverse osmosis, where we use high pressure to force the salt water through a filter. So this is an example of distillation, and I'm going to read what's in the numbers while you actually follow the arrows and can understand it a little better. So look at number 1. Our seawater flows into the chamber. And remember, the seawater has salt in it. And then 2, the heating element is just metal that's really, really hot. Just boils the water in there. And by boiling the water, it's creating steam. And then at 3, the water in the coil causes steam to condense. And then 4, the water that has condensed, which does not have salt attached to it anymore, flows out of the chamber. And then 5, we just have the salt left behind, and it's like so salty water. It could almost like be served at dinner. So that's the distillation process. Then we have the reverse osmosis process. These are both very expensive, by the way. So look at 1, the seawater flows into the chamber. Then in number 2, there's pressure applied into that chamber to all the water that includes the salt and the water. And then 3, under all that pressure, the water can fit through this semi-permeable membrane, but the salt is too big, the particles of salt are too big, and they can't fit through. As a result, we have salt-free water. And then in that chamber for 2, all the brine, that very, very, very salty brine, that salt, is left behind. So desalinization or desalination involves removing dissolved salts from ocean water or from lake water that has salt in it, or brackish water that could be in an estuary, or that's found in an aquifer. It's another way to increase supplies of fresh water to us. According to a report by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, about 15,000 desalinization plants, or desalination, you can say it either way, operate in more than 125 countries. And this is mostly in the arid nations, and there's many of them in the Middle East, North Africa, Caribbean, and the Mediterranean. They meet less than 0.3% of the world's demand for fresh water. So, some major problems with the widespread use of desalination. It's one of the highest and most expensive energy footprints. It takes a lot of energy to desalinate water, and with distillation requiring about 10 times as much energy as reverse osmosis. The second problem is that pumping large volumes of seawater through the pipes and using the chemicals to sterilize the water and keep down the algae growth kills many of the marine organisms. The third problem is that desalination produces large quantities of briny wastewater that contains lots of salt and other minerals. And dumping this concentrated brine into nearby ocean waters increases the salinity of the ocean water, and that's what they're doing. And by doing that, they're threatening food resources and aquatic life in the vicinity. So disposing of it on land could contaminate groundwater and surface water as well. Pros, cons, what do you do? So the bottom line is that currently significant desalinization is practical only for water-short and wealthy countries and cities that can afford its very, very high cost. But scientists and engineers are working to develop better and more affordable desalination technologies. You could be the one to help do that. Make it better. Alright, so we're going to shift a little to the water availability per capita. And this is per capita per year in cubic meters, just so you know. That's how the chart is reported. So the amount of water available per person varies a lot around the world. And if you look really carefully, look where the United States is. We're using a whole lot of water. North Africa, look at the Middle East. And these are regions with the lowest amounts of available fresh water. So we have a lot of water, and that's why we use it. But they don't have a lot of water available. And then if you take a look at how much we're actually using per day, the United States is the king of bad, the king of not being conservative and not living sustainably with our water use. And take a look at everybody else's water use. Any surprises here? Anything that you're interested in? You should know the top 4 water users. And that's per capita. That's on average per person. So don't even worry about how many people live in this country and that. It's just person per average, per capita. Now what you do need to understand about this is we're figuring in all the water that's used in agriculture for the vegetables you eat and the fruit you eat, and all the water that's used in industry and the water that comes out of your sink. So this is not just based on what are you pouring out of your sink and how long are your showers. It's also based on how many TVs and cars you buy, how many carpets you buy, because that has a lot to do with industrial use of water to supply you and to meet your needs. Okay, so just a review. We're using all this water from the ground and we're using too much of it. What are the consequences of using too much of that water again? Do you remember what they are? Hopefully you're thinking, okay, well, the water table is dropping. We have less water in there if the water table drops. How about we have less surface waters in our very important wetlands that filter? We have more land subsidence, think sinkholes. And we have more saltwater intrusion. So these are just some of the consequences of us using our groundwater faster than it gets replenished. So what are some of the methods that we use that also withdraw too much of the groundwater? So we've been talking about surface water. Now let's focus a little on groundwater. So as you hopefully recall, over 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture. So I think we need to spend a little time just going over agriculture and agriculture water use and water withdrawal. So this is one of the ways that we irrigate or plant our crops, and I'm sure you've seen these around Harford County. I know that I see them around here. This is a type of method that we call center pivot irrigation, and our crop is actually going to be on a center plot. So the center pivot is going to be moving along. You can kind of see the lines for it. And this is just an aerial view of what that site actually looks like if you're in an airplane overhead looking at it. Since agriculture is the greatest consumer of fresh water through the world, agriculture presents the greatest potential for conserving water by changing agricultural purposes and practices. There's 4 major techniques for irrigating crops. So we have furrow irrigation. That's the trench, and it's filled with flooded water. Then we have flood irrigation. The entire field is flooded, entire field totally flooded. And then we have spray irrigation. That uses an apparatus that sprays water across a field. Then we have drip irrigation that uses a slow dripping hose that's laid on or buried beneath the soil. And then we have hydroponic agriculture, and that's where crops are grown in fertilized water, and we actually don't use any soil. So looking back on this, furrow irrigation, the trench with flooded water, it's actually 65% efficient. That means that 65% of the water is accessible to the plants and the roots, and the other 35% runs off the field or evaporates. It's wasted. 65% efficient. Flood irrigation is actually a little more efficient than furrow. It ranges from 70 to 80% efficiency. And then we get even more efficient with our spray irrigation. It's 75 to 95% efficient, but it costs the farmer much more because we have to use a lot more energy for it. We also have to use a lot more water. And the best method is actually drip irrigation. It's 95% efficient. 95%. It also has the added benefit of reducing weed growth because the surface soil remains dry, so it's not dry on top, and it discourages weed germination. These systems, the drip irrigation systems, are useful in fields that contain perennial crops like orchard trees, and the hoses don't have to be moved for plowing or anything like that yearly. Ooh. And then it's our hydroponics. So hydroponics, that's really a growing agricultural industry. It's getting very popular. We use it for vegetables mostly. We can do it year round because we use it in a greenhouse. And the water not taken up by the plants can be reused. So this method actually uses 95% less water than all the previous traditional and slightly non-traditional irrigation techniques. So out of our major irrigation systems, because of the high initial costs, center pivot irrigation and drip irrigation are actually not that widely used anymore. And the development of new low-cost drip irrigation systems might actually change how much more of these that we're using. This is just another picture kind of showing you a perspective of what we just discussed from a different source. We are about done. So, industry is the second largest user of water worldwide. Industry is the second largest user of water worldwide. Households are the third largest users of water worldwide. So what do we do about that? Well, some of our solutions are reducing the irrigation water waste. So take a look at these, and which one do you understand and do you think you could remember as a solution for the reduction of irrigation water waste? Okay. Well, that concludes our last little bitty on Chapter 9, at least for dams and using our water resources and what we do to alter that. Please use this information wisely to shrink your footprint. Have a great day.